call them. Could you explain for those people who don't what these people were and maybe what they believed, what you think they believed, and what secrets they were keeping?
The Cathars were a group of Christians who suddenly emerged in the present-day area of the Languedoc-Roussillon in France, southwest France, during the late 10th and early 11th century, and came to considerable prominence in the 2 centuries that followed. It has been alleged, and there's some degree of truth in it, that the teaching on which their faith was based had its origins in Bulgaria, amongst from the teachers of a priest called Bogomil. And this teaching spread to northern Italy, to the Massif Central in France, to the Languedoc-Roussillon, and also to the county of Champagne. They were very simplistic, very clean-living, good people. Their priesthood were known as les bonshommes, the good men, the good Christians. They believed that Jesus was a divinely inspired teacher and was their spiritual master. They did not venerate the cross because they said, why should we venerate the instrument on which our master died? They repudiated the entire complex structure of Catholic sacraments, and in total contradiction to Catholic practice, their priesthood did not live in luxury off the backs of the poor. They lived incredibly simple lives. They lived in communal houses, and they wandered the roads in twos, preaching, teaching, and healing. They were very much into healing, and very strong parallels have been drawn between their practices and those of the Essenes at the time of Jesus. They were dualists. They believed that there were 2 gods. There was a demiurge who created the earth and all the evil that is within it, including the prisons of flesh that our spirits inhabit. And then there was the good God who gave us our spirit.
Is that kind of like Manichaeism?
Yes, there are very, very strong parallels between it and Manichaeism. There's no discernible historic link, but in spiritual terms there are very, very strong parallels. They encouraged industry and activity and established papermaking and artisan and craft centres throughout their region. And the prosperity of that region, and again, this all happened in an area controlled by Rex Deus noblemen who were much more tolerant, and many of whom became Cathars themselves. And the Cathar faith were divided into 2 groups. There were the parfaits, which are the bonshommes, the priesthood, and that admitted women just as happily as it did men. And then there were the believers, the credenti. And the believers had no strict spiritual rules of life. They were expected to be normal, to eat, to procreate, just the same as anybody else. But the ultimate aim was for them to prepare themselves to undergo a sacrament called the consolamentum. And when one had the consolamentum, one became a parfait. For the vast majority of believers, this was administered on their deathbed, which is probably as well, because it meant you then, as a parfait, if you were still alive, you had to live a very strict life. You abstained from all meat, you abstained from all sexual acts, and you dedicated your life to the service of the community in which you lived. They were extremely admirable people. Needless to say, the churches soon began to empty, and the Cathar faith took hold. And because of their encouragement of industry and activity, a level of prosperity was reached in the Languedoc-Roussillon which was almost unparalleled. In fact, according to a lot of historical authorities, had the Albigensian Crusade not taken place, the Renaissance would have happened 200 years earlier than in fact it did. But in the Languedoc, not in northern Italy. Their activities did not endear them to His Holiness the Umpteenth in Rome. Well, His Holiness the Umpteenth was Innocent III, actually. And after a murder of one of the papal legates who had been sent to quell the area, the Pope decided to call a crusade against them. But before he did, he sent in a preaching ministry headed by a priest, a Spanish priest called Dominic Guzman. And Guzman founded a home for fallen women at Prouy, which was empty from the time it opened to the time it shut, and went on a very vigorous preaching campaign along with several companions, and eventually he lost patience with the Cathar people. And he said, "Preaching and entreaty have failed us, now you will receive the stick." The Papal Crusade started very shortly afterwards, and any crusader who served 40 days was given remission of all sins, for the sins he had already committed or those he might commit on the crusade. Any heretics' lands became forfeit to anybody who could grab them. It was a license to raid, pillage and steal, and the crusade went on for over 30 years. Worse was to follow. Dominic Guzman had founded a clerical order known as, to this day, as the Dominicans. And after the crusade against the Cathars, which was incredibly brutal, and that would take half an hour to describe and might turn the stomachs of some of your viewers, because the brutality was phenomenal. After the war was over, to stamp out the last remnants of Catharism, the Pope instituted the Holy Office of the Inquisition, which was staffed by the Dominicans, who then terrorized the entire area for the following 60 years and went on to terrorize Europe. And for those of you who think that the Inquisition is something from the past, I've got bad news for you. It still exists to this day.
Really?
Under the rather euphemistic title, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And it's still a disciplinarian organisation within the church that excommunicated a very dearly beloved colleague of mine called Matthew Fox, and was until very recently run by Cardinal Ratzinger, who was known as God's Rottweiler. And while Cardinal
Well, that's a history of the Cathars, and we can see why the Catholic Church wanted rid of them. One, because they were obviously doing a much better job with the local people than themselves. Why are the Knights Templar always involved in stories and tales of the Cathars and many of the modern day fictions, such as the Da Vinci Code?
Oh, have you got a year?
No, we've got another
Templar.
40 minutes or so.
The Knights Templar, a name redolent with mystery and intrigue, founded in very mysterious circumstances at a date that no true historian can ever agree on. Contemporary historians at the time of the foundation, or the alleged time of the foundation of the Knights Templar, placed their foundation at any time from 1105 to 1119. There is a general consensus, which seems almost without foundation, that they were founded in 1118 and 1119. And that was obviously based on the work of William of Tyre, an archbishop who didn't like the Templars incident much very well, and who was writing some 70 years after the event. But the contemporary writers placed the foundation very much earlier. What can be established is they're the result of a conspiracy mounted by the Rexdales families, mainly centred on the county of Champagne and the district we now call Flanders, the Royal House of Flanders. Ostensibly founded to protect the pilgrims for the Holy Land, in actual fact they were trying to reclaim what they thought was their ancient and rightful patrimony, namely the land of Palestine. They were incredibly brave warriors. They had military discipline that was incomparable at the time. They were the first standing army in Europe since the fall of the Roman Empire. Incredibly brave, strategically inept, skilled diplomatists who made various treaties with the Muslims, and strangely from the Christian perspective kept them.
Yes.
The Muslims never broke a treaty.